with the WAF bypass. Let's go.
All right, all right. How do I pin this on?
Just hold it and then just like speak.
All right, yeah. Okay, so this is my talk on web application firewall bypass. I'm AT. I'm a third-year CSEC BS major. I do web hacking sometimes, and then there was that one. There was that one crypto presentation that went to my head, which people seem to like. So what's a web application firewall? And some other layman definitions that we'll go over in case you haven't really done any of this before. A WAF stands for a web application firewall. WAFs monitor traffic to a web server and block it based on conditions maintained by the WAF providers. Sometimes this means blocking DOS-type attacks, denial of service. But what we're interested in for the scope of this talk is specifically like trying to run some sort of code, trying to hack the server. So for this talk, we're going to be talking specifically about, or all of our examples are going to include XSS, which, if you didn't catch my presentation over the summer, that's exploiting sites by sending them a bit of HTML that runs some script that can be malicious if you'd like it to be. If a site stores and shows data that is supplied or can be edited by the user, it's sometimes possible to use this kind of attack. Also, even though we're only doing XSS for this talk, there are a whole bunch of other different types of vulnerabilities that we'll go over. Quite often you'll see SQL injection. There are a few more. So where do WAFs come in? If a WAF detects an attempted attack, it will block the traffic. WAFs detect these types of attacks by listening for specific strings. For example, to prevent a basic XSS attack, a WAF might listen for the string script and block any traffic containing it, since script would be what would run in XSS. So what's a WAF bypass? If a site has XSS vulnerability and is protected by an imperfect WAF, a specially crafted XSS payload can successfully be run. If a WAF is only listening for script, like our last example, and an XSS payload not containing script, like let's say image on air equals console.log document.cookie, if you can send that, and since the WAF is only listening for script, it will get passed, and you might be able to get cookies. So anyway, that's the layman definitions. Let's get to the fun. I want to note here that there are a lot of good resources out there, but one of the best is just a slide deck that I found while researching that has just so much comprehensive data, and that would be, it's hosted by OWASP. I respect this man too much to mispronounce his name. And that's from like, what, 6 years ago now, and it's just amazing. And there's also a whole bunch of other stuff in there, but that one was really useful. So why is it when something happens, it's always one of these three? It's either preprocessor exploitation, impedance mismatch, or ruleset bypassing. So let's go over preprocessor exploitation. First thing a WAF does when it receives data is run it through what's called a preprocessor. This is what sends data to be normalized and processed and do all the other stuff with it that you need to do. If we can trick the WAF into not even interacting with the data in the first place, we've exploited the preprocessor. So let's see some examples of attacks that might do that. We've got parameter verification bypass. If a WAF that only checks parameters gets data that doesn't have the parameters it's expecting, it might not check those extra parameters since, of course, they're not going to do anything. They're not the parameters it wants. So, for example, let's take PHP. If we put in the symbol %20, which we'll get to later, actually, if we put in symbols that it's not expecting, and then those symbols get removed, we've got it to not even check the data. So this is different depending on what framework you're running. For PHP, you would have %20. For ASPX, you would just have %. I'm sure there are others. We can trick the WAF into thinking that the data is coming from somewhere else than it's actually coming from by using headers. This is one that I thought was rather interesting. We can give the WAF something that is not an actual method, and depending on how it interprets that, it might skip it. Although what should happen is you should just get a 405 method not supported. sometimes, and this one really surprised me, WAFs will just skip traffic if they have really high load in order to save on resources. So if you just send a whole bunch of requests and it's not rate limiting, you can actually get some through. But if it is rate limiting, you're just going to get a 429, too many requests. All right, so let's go on to impedance mismatch. If the data does reach the WAF, there are ways to make your traffic look benign to the front end, but malicious to the back end. Let's look at some examples of impedance mismatch. So again, if you didn't catch my talk over the summer, I already did a slide on this. There's something called parameter pollution, and I found a cool video on it a while ago. Basically, there's a common bug where if a parser doesn't URL encode a parameter, you can rewrite previous parameters or add parameters or basically cause different behavior based on what the server is running. So I can become user 0 or 10 or 1 or no change. It's very interesting. Specifically, what we would use here is parameter fragmentation, where if we have an XSS vulnerable Flask server, that is one that's going to append all the same parameters in order, what we do is, if say it's my username, and my username is going to get reflected on the screen, I change my username to script alert 1 script, which is a very, very basic XSS payload, and I try and run that, and it blocks it. What we do is instead, we set my username to the beginning of that, and then a little bit more of that, and then a little bit more of that, and a little bit more of that. And since as it checks each one of those, it's like, oh yes, all these on their own are benign. All these I'm just going to let through, and then it gets through. And what you actually see on the page is all of those concatenated together. We have our payload reconstructed, and we can get in. So let's talk about double URL encoding. And it's at this point when I was writing the presentation that I realized I should probably mention what URL encoding is in the first place. Certain characters don't really work in URLs, so there's special encoding to make them work. By putting a % in front of a numeric code, you can substitute a symbol. So if you just go to a search engine and you type in a bunch of special characters and then look up in your URL bar, you will see that some of them have been URL encoded. Unrelated side note, when I did this, the first thing I got was something from the FBI vault, which was interesting enough, but moving on. Double URL encoding is when, so all the numbers also have those codes, and the % has one of those codes. In fact, every character, I believe, has one of those codes, at least every ASCII character. So we can build a URL code out of those codes, which will then simplify twice, depending on what we're doing, into the code we want. So let's take our S there and turn that into a %73, which is what the code for S is. And then let's take %25, which is the %, and then %37, which is the 7 sign, and then %33, which is the 3 sign, and put all of those together. And we can get an unholy payload that doesn't look like anything until it's simplified. Now, this is probably my favorite because this is where there's the most intricacy. We have Ruleset Bypassing. This is probably what you hear about when you're actually looking for WAF bypass stuff. Saving the best for last, we have Ruleset Bypassing. This is our good old deep dive HTML documentation until you find something that hasn't been seen since the Eldritch Gods were last awake kind of thing. To find something that the firewall devs hadn't considered, because HTML and JavaScript and all that is pretty complex. So there's only so much that web application firewalls can account for. There are a bunch of tools out there for this, for weird and obscure payloads. You can also set one up yourself. So figuring out what the WAF is filtering, that's important. You can do guess and check. You can look for observed edge cases. And an example of some of those, in fact, an example for a lot of those, is a GitHub page that is updated, I think, quite a bit, actually. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, let's grab that up. So if we scroll down, we're going to see that this is massive. Look at that. It shows the scroll bar. Do you see how slowly the scroll bar is going down? There's so many of these. So you can feed that in. You can try and find what you're looking for there. Yeah. And on that note, there are even more resources than just that. So one of the good sites that comes up a lot is wafbypass.com. Not all of it is quality, but it's coming out every day. It's ridiculous. So I found a couple of interesting ones just looking around that I thought I would bring up. So I found this one, which is from September, so this month. And so this one is if you see a web application firewall, or if you see on a web application firewall protected website that it is auto-correcting you, you can give it a near miss, so script instead of script. And if it autocorrects to script, you have gotten your remote code. And then the other one I found, which was, this was pretty simple, but if you leave your mouse for long enough, it'll run it. All you got to do is leave your mouse.
Is it doing it?
Well, I mean, I'm not running it directly, but. Anyway, back to the presentation. Yeah, so the guy who wrote these slides I mentioned earlier also is kind of an authority on this. He has a common tool called WAF Ninja, which it has two modes. And one of them will test everything. That's called fuzzing. It will increment its tests until it finds something that works. And this is a common tactic when trying to find any kind of vulnerability. Live Overflow has a great video on it for trying to find the sudo vulnerability that just came out recently. And the other one will just take from the, well, essentially take from the list I showed earlier, probably its own hard-coded list, but I'm sure you could supply one, and try everything on that list specifically. There's also another kind of strategy if you want to bypass a web application firewall. And let's just take a look at like this kind of thing. We see that for a specific firewall, there's this exploit that has been known since 2019, right? So if you can figure out what kind of firewall you're using, sometimes you don't even have to like find the exploit yourself or test a whole bunch of different ones, because you can look for ones that have already been found. So this is where fingerprinting comes in. I should try and hurry up this presentation because the laptop might die and I don't want that. Some WAFs have known unpatched vulnerabilities, and we can test for them. Some WAFs add cookies. So if a WAF is adding a cookie to your web traffic, sometimes it'll identify itself. Others modify patterns to trip up, or parameters to trip up attackers, which I thought was very interesting. Some outright say who they are, so if you're blocked by Cloudflare, odds are they're using Cloudflare. Others have specific response. Yeah, we're looking. Yeah, some have specific responses to whatever traffic you send it. Others respond differently to TCP flags. Rule sets can be another giveaway, so depending on what you type, different WAFs will block different things, and if you can figure out what the WAF is blocking, sometimes you know, yes, it's this WAF, and therefore I should use this payload instead. Another one, which I found very interesting, was that checking how long it takes for the WAF to actually filter your traffic can be a fingerprinting technique. If any of those sound like Nmap jobs, it's because they are. There's a script for this. Super simple for Nmap. There are also a whole bunch of other tools that one of my sources outlined very briefly, and I will probably eventually check out, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to stick to the Nmap script for now until that stops being useful. Anyway, there's a lot of information out there. Everybody is working on this, it feels like, and I just barely started it. So it's really difficult, especially on the blue team side of things. Autonomously monitoring traffic is complex and difficult. There's an entire interest group based on it. Hi, Evan. Go to IRIG. I hope I've given a slightly adequate overview, but there's still so much more. Yeah. Anyway, questions? Thank you.
All right, big round of applause.